The Assad regime in Syria, which ruled for over 50 years, came crashing down in December of 2024, and it was replaced with a former al-Qaeda and ISIS-affiliated terrorist group called HTS. You would think this developing situation would be talked about regularly in the media, but it's not. Syria is one of only 4 countries that share a border with Israel, so what happens next in Syria will have a definite effect on Israel's security here in the Middle East. Let's get into it. I'm Justin Hilton, and this is the Israel Guys. Much of the world rejoiced this past December when the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad came crumbling down. Bashar was the son of Hafiz al-Assad, who participated in 2 coups between 1963 and 1966 before initiating a 3rd coup in 1970, which ultimately made him the dictator of Syria. He ruled until his death in 2000, at which time Abdul Qaddam was acting president for just 37 days until Bashar took over. Bashar al-Assad is probably most known for using chemical weapons against his own people during Syria's 15-year-long civil war. In fact, the Bashar al-Assad government has been implicated in over 300 chemical attacks, killing an estimated 2,500 people. Considering that estimates are that over 500,000 people have been killed as a result of the Syrian civil war, with over 13 million displaced either internally or externally, it's not hard to see why anything other than Assad would be considered an improvement. But better doesn't necessarily mean good. And the current president, Abu Mohammed al-Julani, raises a lot of red flags. Abu Mohammed al-Julani, whose real name is Ahmed Hussein al-Sharaa, has a long and colorful history with various terrorist organizations. In fact, until recently, the US had a $10 million bounty on information that would lead to the capture of Julani. Recapture would be more accurate though, since he spent 5 years imprisoned by American forces from 2006 to 2011 for his role in fighting Americans involved in the 2003 Iraq War to topple the Saddam Hussein dictatorship. Julani was born October 29th in 1982 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. His family had fled from the Golan Heights after the Six-Day War when Israel regained control over that area. Interestingly, Julani's father was imprisoned twice in Syria by Bashar al-Assad's father and his supporters in the 60s and 70s, so his victory over Assad was also deeply personal. Julani's father worked as an oil engineer in Saudi Arabia, and his mother was a geography teacher, giving Julani a comfortable, middle-class upbringing. At the age of 7, his family returned to Syria, but this time to an affluent neighborhood in Damascus. Julani took a job at a local grocery store, and at the age of 17, he became religious. Classmates from his childhood described him as quiet, shy, manipulatively intelligent, and socially introverted. In a 2021 film called The Jihadist, Julani is interviewed by an American, the first senior al-Qaeda leader to do so since Osama bin Laden did in 1998. He attributes the Second Intifada as the motivation to wage jihad. He told the interviewer, quote, "I was 17 or 18 years old at the time, and I started thinking about how to fulfill my duties defending a people who are oppressed by occupiers and invaders." 4 years after becoming religious, Julani traveled to Iraq and joined al-Qaeda. This is where he chose his nom de guerre, Abu Mohammed al-Julani. Julani references his family's ties to the Golan Heights. He was in Baghdad, ready to fight when the Iraq War broke out. As Julani climbed the ranks within al-Qaeda, he soon caught the attention of the CIA. In 2005, he was arrested and spent the next 5 years of his life in American theater internment facilities across Iraq, the majority of that time in Camp Baca. Julani used his time in prison to write a 50-page paper on how he wanted to take jihad to Syria. He was released in 2010, at which time he became a commander in al-Qaeda. Around a year later, the Arab Spring came to Syria. Julani requested from the head of the Islamic State of Iraq that he be permitted to form a new al-Qaeda branch in Syria. He requested 100 men, but the al-Qaeda leadership was not favorable to his plan. Instead, they sent him with 6 men and a modest deposit of $50,000 to $60,000 per month. Julani returned to Syria wearing a suicide vest in case he was captured en route. At this time in Syria, the protests against Assad had intensified. Assad was indiscriminately bombing neighborhoods he suspected were harboring resistance fighters. and it was the perfect climate for recruiting fighters for the war against Assad. Julani kept his al-Qaeda connections hidden and formed Jabhat al-Nusra, also known as al-Nusra Front, with limited resources. Julani chose suicide bombings as his main method of attacking Assad's forces. And these actions resulted in the al-Nusra Front being designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the US. Julani said he felt that this was unjust as he was simply targeting Assad, an unjust dictator. And while a few experts agree that Julani's tactics were more focused on attacking Assad and his men instead of civilians, they also say that his hands are not entirely clean. Guys, we'll be right back with the rest of the show in just 1 second. But first, with the challenges that Israel is facing, I want to share with you a way that you can strengthen Jewish families on the front lines of the battle for the land. Blessed by Israel is a company that brings the amazing products of families in the biblical heartland to people around the world. From Israel to your doorstep, enjoy awesome products like coffee roasted to perfection by Agro Cafe, which I'm actually drinking right here, by the way. It's pretty good. Also, several kinds of delicious honey, jewelry, organic spices, and much, much more, all from wonderful small family-owned businesses in Israel. Be a part of encouraging and investing in the people of Israel and enjoy high-quality products at the same time. Head over to blessedbyisrael.com to purchase beautiful boutique products and make your impact today. Even better, you can use the code INVEST for $5 off your first order at blessedbyisrael.com. You can also find the link in the description below. How did the local Syrians receive Julani? Freelance reporter Rania Abu Zaid was able to interview Julani and the al-Nusra Front at this time, and she says that when al-Nusra Front was declared a terrorist organization by the US, that Friday, during prayers, the crowd started chanting their support for the terrorist organization.
They made that message clear to the Obama administration. Jabhat al-Nusra is part of us, these Syrians chanted. The U.S. was hoping to marginalize the group when it labeled...
Within the first year, Julani's group grew from 6 men to 5,000. Money also increased with donations from those sympathetic to his cause in the Gulf states and from looting factories. Kidnapping foreign nationals was also a tactic used, which successfully brought in tens of millions of dollars. Julani's fundraising was so successful that at its peak, he was actually sending money back to the commander of the Islamic Militant Umbrella Organization. And this umbrella organization, which covered al-Qaeda in Iraq amongst others, later rebranded into ISIC, or Islamic State in Iraq. However, as is often the case with radical Muslim terrorists, tensions soon flared between the two groups, and Islamic State in Iraq made a surprise announcement that it was banning the name al-Nusra Front and that they would be absorbed into ISIC, which was at the time rebranding itself into ISIS. Julani made a public statement the next day saying that he was only made aware of this announcement through the media and that he absolutely rejected the notion. Julani insists to this day that his focus has always been on toppling Assad and that external foreign objectives have not been a part of his strategy. However, there are accusations against Julani of harboring men from the Taliban who are actively plotting attacks against the West. And there are also the documented attacks his men committed against civilians from the al-Sharaa sect. And then, in 2015, when Russia entered the war after a little convincing from Iran, Julani decided to change his strategy. The Russians had significant air power, and Julani called for Russian assets to be attacked, whether they were in Syria or abroad in Russia. As Russian attacks intensified, Julani and his men were quickly losing ground. Julani's response was to turn and attack Alawite villages. During this time period of the Syrian civil war, there were increased accusations against prisoners being tortured in Julani's prisons. One of the prisons even earned the nickname Hell Station because of the brutality shown to its detainees. So fast forward to 2016, and the civil war in Syria has now been raging for 5 years. Julani is coming to realize that his ties with al-Qaeda have become a liability. Assad and his allied Russian forces are using this connection as justification for their heavy attacks against Julani. Julani makes the decision to publicly sever ties with al-Qaeda and all other groups. And these were not mere words. Julani's forces soon turned against al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other jihadi groups operating in Syria. In 2017, Julani joined a coalition of factions called HTS. Many experts agree that this marked a significant change in Julani's tactics. It was during this time that Julani rebranded from a strictly jihadist terrorist group like ISIS and began functioning in civilian matters as well. He formed a group of ministries that make up Syria's salvation government. Their focus was civilian. They collected the trash, supplied water and electricity, even ran the courts, hospitals, and schools. Despite the war and its many challenges, these systems are running reasonably well and running according to Islamic rule. And that is part of Julani's goal, to have a society functioning according to Islamic Sharia law.
نموذج استطاع أن يثبت نفسه واستطاع أن يدير.
However, despite the improvements that civilians in areas controlled by Julani's Nusra Front are experiencing, they're not free. Remember that Julani is a terrorist after all. Promoting democracy or speaking out against Julani is enough to get you arrested and beaten and, in some cases, even executed. December 2024 was a day that many prayed for, but most had lost hope of actually seeing. The Assad regime collapsed, his allies having abandoned him. With Julani leading the rebel groups, it was only natural for him to become the president of Syria. Shortly after, he established the Syrian caretaker government, which has set a time limit upon itself to rewrite the constitution of Syria within 5 years. In March of this year, the Syrian caretaker government was replaced by the Syrian transitional government, also led by Julani. Julani immediately established new ministries, including the Ministry of Youth and Sports and the Ministry of Emergency and Disaster Management, and appointed new ministers to the existing ministries. During this period, Julani was successful in convincing the U.S. to remove the $10 million bounty on his head under the Rewards for Justice program. However, he and HTS still are on the U.S. list of foreign terrorist organizations. Getting removed from this list will take significant time and effort. Julani will have to prove that he no longer has ties to foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS and al-Qaeda. He will also need to demonstrate that he's no longer engaged in acts of terrorism and does not pose a threat to the national security of the US or her allies, and this of course will include Israel. And with a nom de guerre that actually references the Golan, this will prove quite the challenge. At this point, it is still very difficult to determine what kind of threat the new Syrian government will pose to Israel. Julani's homeland is the Golan, which he considers occupied by Israel. One of his primary motivations in jihad is the Palestinian cause, which seeks the annihilation of Israel. He's also a masterful strategist, so while his current reform certainly is appealing to maybe the Trump administration, to the rest of the Western world, is it a true reform or is it just a masquerade to gain power until the right calculated moment? And of course, there are the allegations lodged against him and his followers by various minority groups in Syria. Rebel groups in different areas accuse Julani of crushing dissent and an authoritarian rule similar to that of the Assad regime. There are many imprisoned for criticizing the new government. There are also documented cases from several human rights organizations, including the UN, who claim that torture and death are a part of Julani's methods to quiet protests. Take a look at this footage from the 2021 film, The Jihadist. Here, a journalist describes the torture he endured inside of one of Julani's prisons around 2016.
وبدأوا بالضرب يعني علينا بشكل قوي يعني قوي هي حفل استقبال قولنا هي حفل استقبال ما كان في أي توجيه لاتهام أو ما في أي سؤال ما في أي شيء.
Al-Dali spent 40 days there. Many weeks after he returned home, the signs of torture were still visible on his back.
With history like this, it is no surprise that there is significant resistance and hesitancy to embrace the freshly made over Julani. Israel is especially wary of Julani, and in recent weeks they've been actively engaged in protecting the Druze communities in Syria close to Israel's borders. Now, President Trump just had a meeting with Julani, encouraging him to join the Abraham Accords. So Israel is in a very tricky situation right now. Let's pray for Israel to make the right decisions, to stand strong. I think it's a very dangerous thing to be making deals with actual terrorist leaders. So let's keep this whole situation in our prayers. Guys, make sure and check out Blessed by Israel to support the pioneers of Judea and Samaria and get awesome products at the same time. Just go to blessedbyisrael.com or click the link in the description below. As always, stop listening to the lies and propaganda and connect with the truth of what is happening in Israel. We'll be back soon here at the Israel Guys. Catch you in the next one.